Hello, everyone, and welcome back to One Soccer. I'm your host for today, Josh Deming, joined by my colleague Alex Gongay-Ruzic, and our special guest for today, Ben Steiner of 49 Sportnet, which is home of wall-to-wall coverage of all things U Sports. Ben, how are you doing today?
Not too bad. Always happy to come on and chat U Sports when it gets a little bit of spotlight at this time of year, of course, with the draft coming up.
Beautiful, because that's exactly why you are here, Ben. The draft is coming up on December 14th, right here on One Soccer. And a fun little fact for you all out there, there's been a record 203 players that have declared for this draft, and we've seen some huge success over the first 5 years. Some names like Kobza, Yesley, Laturi, Matusala, Batar, Johnston, Verhoeven, Waterman, Sissoko, Ongaro. There's been plenty of talent that has come through this draft. So Ben, first question, how important has the growth of the U Sports been for the CPL pipeline?
I mean, it's been vital, not even just in the draft, but also in making signings from U Sports as well. We've seen some players have to go through the draft a few times to really find their footing. Of course, Gabriel Batar was picked, I think it was 3 times before he really found his footing in the CPL. He was the first overall pick back in 2019. And I remember that was an in-person draft in Montreal, and that was a little bit earlier because that happened in partnership with the U Sports Soccer Championships as well, and all the coaches were there. It was a fairly decent sized event, and of course now it's mainly a broadcast, which has been great the last few years. And so yeah, it's been vital, the draft towards the growth of the CPL and really offering a different player pool, and one that is fairly inexpensive for teams.
Absolutely. And Alex, when you see names like Victor Laturi and Joel Waterman, who have gone on to play in Europe, play in the Major League Soccer, and of course play for the national team, I mean, it's got to be a big encouragement for some of these teams to hopefully find a bunch of talent in this draft.
Yeah, it's huge for teams as well. Like 100%, the fact that you can find good talent. And also I think of the players in this as well, because as a young player, sometimes you can be, when you want to be a professional, you sacrifice education, you sacrifice some of those possibilities. And it's good to know that, okay, maybe if you're not a pro by 16, 17, 18, that there's still a chance for you to go develop at your own speed, go to university, get a degree, and potentially still end up playing for your national team, still end up playing professionally. I think that's also a huge part that will motivate a lot of talented players to keep going in the sport, even if they don't achieve their dreams by 17, 18.
Absolutely. So now it's time to learn a little bit about these players, which is why Ben is here. So we are going to do a mock draft. So each team in the league gets 2 picks across 2 rounds. It's based off playoff results and regular season table, and it's a snake draft. So we are going to begin at the basement with Valour FC. So Ben, give me a couple names of players that you think Valour are going to go for.
Valor's been interesting the last few years because they actually seem to do some scouting at a bit of a higher level than some other CPL clubs. They really take a look at players coming out of Quebec, which I find interesting for a program in Manitoba. There aren't really U Sports soccer programs in Manitoba on the men's side of things. There are a couple of women's programs, so you can't look in your local backyard as you can if you're, a York United with York University and Ontario Tech right there, and we've seen that theme in their selections as well. I'm going to go with center back Adam Ben Musa out of the University of Montreal for Valour as their top pick. And I think something that is important to consider is it's not always the best players who are getting picked in the CPL draft. It's often, where there's a need, where there's a bit of a connection, maybe previous relationship between coaches, familiarity with programs, familiarity with players. I think we saw that last year with Anthony White going first overall from the University of Toronto to Vancouver FC. And of course, he settled in quite nicely. So I do think Adam Ben Musa, probably from Montreal, given Valour's past history of selecting from the RSEQ, the Quebec Conference. And he was part of a Montreal backline that conceded just 9 goals in the regular season this year and made themselves a pretty well contender at the national championships. Didn't end up going on to win it. That was Cape Breton, but I could see him making his way to Valour for next season.
Alex, center back, is that what Valour needs?
I could see that. They have one of the best midfields in the league. That was definitely not a problem for them last year. They need to shore things up at the back, and they need to shore things up front. So I could see maybe across their 2 picks, you get a center back, you get a forward. So I think, the Montreal connection is huge as well, because Phil DeSantos, with his brother Mark, they've always had huge connections to Montreal from the days that Mark was working at the Impact, as it was known at the time. So I could see that. And hey, maybe on the forward side, we'll talk about him a bit later as a sleeper pick elsewhere. But if someone like Tyler Tardo is also from Manitoba, so even though he doesn't play U Sports in Manitoba, maybe he gets thrown out there as well.
Moving on to the new kids on the block, Vancouver FC. Ben, is there any players out there that you think that Vancouver could take on? Because they had a really tough start to the season. They finished pretty strong, and they're hoping to build on that strong finish.
There's a few players out there that I think Vancouver could take a look at, and Eric Ueski from Carleton is one that I'd like them to take a look at. He was a real shining light in a Carleton team that went on to win the OUA championship in Ontario. Didn't quite perform at the level that they wanted to at the national championship, but Ueski is a second year and he was outstanding. But I don't think they're going to go with him, just based on past draft given last year, given what that Vancouver team has sort of consisted of. He was at Carleton but never played with Gabe Bitar, so there's not like an instant chemistry there. I think they'll probably go with Luke Norman from UBC. Performed at a high level for the UBC Thunderbirds. There would have been an opportunity to go take a look at him, and was also, just a real standout as a first year, and somebody who can step into a CPL lineup and potentially develop as well. Because when you're looking at the CPL draft, you look at players who have remaining eligibility in U Sports, and if you take a first year, well, he has a few more years that he can develop in U Sports, get used to that level, and potentially even play the summer in the CPL and then go back to school. Whereas if you take somebody in fourth year, they could do that. They only have sort of 1 year left, and they're a little bit closer to the finished product.
Alex, you watched Vancouver FC a lot last year. Ben went for two midfielders. Is that what they need?
I could see especially the Norman pick, because what's fascinating with him, he's not your traditional midfielder. Having had the chance to watch him in League One BC with the Whitecaps, he can play up front, he can play out wide, he's really flexible. And I think that's a great Vancouver pick, because Afshin Gotby prioritizes flexibility in the attack and in midfield. So he could slot in nicely, kind of like a Vasco Fry-like player. Maybe he could, be a bit of an understudy to Vasco Fry, funnily enough, both former Whitecaps guys. So maybe there'd be a bit of familiarity there. And I think the Norman pick would make a lot of sense near the top of the draft, because I think he's going to be very coveted after at his age. He had a very good freshman season with UBC, scored a lot of goals. He scored a lot of goals in League One as a youngster. With that eligibility thing, it makes a huge difference. It's why Eric Lajeunesse was picked by Pacific, who retained his rights. And I think someone like Vancouver making a pick on Norman and retaining his rights similarly would be a very smart idea.
Now, Ben, moving on to Atletico Ottawa, I'm assuming you're going to take a look at some players from Carleton, so tell me what you got.
I had 3 players listed as potential picks in this spot, and all 3 are from Carleton, so you're right there. With the season that Carleton had winning the OUA title, it just seems that it's hard to overlook them. And I would take Omar Darwish, another center midfielder coming off his first year with Ottawa. And again, when you're looking at sort of what that Atletico team is made up of, there's a lot of veteran talent there, but also a opportunity to potentially put in a talented youngster and somebody who can grow into that role, somebody you can retain the rights of. And Darwish showed well with Carleton. Certainly still has a ways to go before he can be a consistent contributor at the CPL level, but I think he has that potential, and I think that's what Atletico Ottawa will draft for.
Now, Alex, Atletico Ottawa obviously was very upset not to make the playoffs. They're definitely looking to build back into that, considering they won the regular season title the previous year. So midfield, is that what you think that they need, or would you look elsewhere?
Yeah, this Ottawa team's interesting, because I feel like it also is going to depend on what some of their signings look like. Of course, like what's a Diego Espejo going to happen, because he's such a key part of that team and was kind of sorely missed as he dealt with injury problems and suspensions this year. So depending on that, I could also maybe see them target at the back. And as well, maybe up front as well, they could use some depth. So this Ottawa team could really, I feel like, go anywhere across the board. But the midfield could make sense, especially if Ilias Iliadis ends up sticking with Montreal, because they did, end up exercising his option. Maybe they liked what they saw from him on loan, and there could be a spot opened up for a Darwish or, maybe another Carleton midfielder as well.
The next team I'm very intrigued about, they got brand new owners. It's York United. York University's right there, literally right there, Ben. So again, is that probably where you're looking?
Weirdly, they haven't had a ton of picks out of York University. It's been drawing on Ontario Tech a little bit more, which is a little bit odd. I don't think they do that this year. I think the options coming out of York are enticing to any CPL team, and especially York United, who could use a player to step right in and start contributing. And that's why I'm going with either Tyler Achardo at forward, but I'll leave him for potentially the second round. It could be a Valour pick. I'll go with Christian Zeppieri, a center midfielder, a little bit more of an 8. He's a second year, so he still has a while to go in terms of developing, but he could play the entire summer and then go back to university as well and still play at the same stadium. He had a year in the NCAA and then came up to U Sports and was a standout in his rookie season in U Sports, and then was also solid this year. One concern is possibly the professionalism there. Not that his approach to the game is something that I'm doubting, but after scoring a wonderful free kick, he is very good from set pieces. After scoring a wonderful free kick in the playoffs, he took his shirt off in celebration, and that was a second yellow and ended up missing the final. And so there's something there that I think we have to look at, but not enough to avoid selecting him because he's one of the best players on that York team.
Now, Alex, like I mentioned, new owners, there could be some international players coming in, a tough roster to make. Do you think it makes sense to go for a player that is a fourth year that can maybe come in right away, or a player that needs to go back to school and develop it for a couple more seasons?
Yeah, with York, looking at that team, their attack's very solid. So I think if they're going to look, getting some midfielders and some defenders could maybe make a lot of sense. And yeah, someone who in midfield who can come in and compete, like a Zeppieri. I like the mention of more of a veteran name. I think someone that I could also look like, that Ben's highlighted. We had the chance to watch him together because we did commentary for York Lions a couple years back, is Isaac Bradbury as well. He's a veteran. He's a fourth-year midfielder. He played in the Canadian Championship last year as well with Vaughan. So he's got some experience in some of those bigger stages. Maybe they look at a Bradbury. If not, I could see them draft at the back. So if I'm not mistaken, last year they drafted or they should have drafted a Milos Djurdjic. He ended up going to Ford, if I'm not mistaken. But maybe they could have looked at someone like him back in that draft, and maybe they'll be like, okay, yeah, we really missed a chance to get a defender because they struggled a lot last year with center back depth. So maybe they look at something like that as well.
Next up is the Halifax Wanderers. Who wouldn't want to play there, Ben? A lot of really talented team right now. A lot of a fun system to go with. So who do you have as a match for that team?
I think it's got to be Daniel Clark, a fourth-year goalkeeper. Covering hockey too much recently. Fourth-year goalkeeper out of Cape Breton, won the national championship with Cape Breton, was astounding with them this season. And I think really solidifying that goalkeeper position for Halifax with a U Sports pick could be a smart way to go. It's an easy way to get a keeper that, in their first couple seasons could be among the goalkeeper of the year nominees. We see that with Ryan Yesley and Valour. So I would probably go with Daniel Clark, dominant, commanding in his area with Cape Breton, and I think he could continue that with Halifax.
Alex, I feel like you'd like that pick because I know last season, despite how fun it was to watch Halifax play, you always had some question marks around Fillion. So do you like this pick?
Yeah, I could see them shoring up the goalkeeper position because the Fillion one's interesting because he brought some much needed leadership to that back line, no doubt. But, he could play the ball at his feet, but sometimes his shot stopping. Also, he was always battling injuries. Shoring up some depth at that position can make sense. I know they had Aiden Rushinas, but they didn't get to see the field. He's a bit younger. If I'm not mistaken, they might have retained his rights, but bringing in someone like a Clark and maybe you make that position a bit more competitive. Maybe that allows you to push Rushinas to go get minutes elsewhere. And then there's a scenario where Fillion, I think his contract's only through this year. So maybe if he departs, then you could have a Rushinas-Clark partnership down the road. So I could see a goalkeeper making sense. If not, I think Patrice Geyser could also look at some defenders, especially if he doesn't know how long Dan Nimick could be sticking around.
Next up is Pacific FC. Ben, who do you got for me?
If Luke Norman is still on the board for Pacific, I think they go with him. But I'm going to go with a local Vancouver Island pick, more so because I would like to see it than I necessarily think it is likely. Just considering that they've never really reached to the University of Victoria, but I'm going to go with the attacking midfielder Javier Sagaste, a fourth year who has been strong for Victoria over the last few years and has really just made that team tick. They had a change in their coaching a couple of years ago, and he was swift in that, adapted to a new system well, and he was one of the top assisters in U Sports this season as well. And I think, you can never have too many good attacking midfielders. And that's a spot that Pacific could improve on this year.
I was going to say Pacific attacking midfielder Manny Aparicio. What a better player to learn from and learn a league from. So Alex, I mean, it might be tough to sometimes get into the starting 11, but seriously, when it comes to players who know this league very well and can produce at a creative level, Manny's one of the best. So do you like that fit?
Yeah, and I mean, look, there's also the chance that Manny Aparicio doesn't stick around at Pacific, right? We'll see what the offseason ends up looking like in terms of just, the future there. But I think that the Javier Sagaste shout, I love that. He's a League One guy, so having a chance to watch some Highlanders games. Last year he's a talented attacking midfielder. He can deliver some excellent service. I think that's the sort of thing Pacific can afford to take a punt on, because their backline was among the best in the league. They have no issues there. So much depth. Even in midfield they were solid, but at times the attack there's talented options, but there's sometimes just that creation, that final pass to get guys like Ongaro more service. I think someone like a Sagaste could come in and learn from an Aparicio, like I mentioned, or potentially be someone long-term, especially because I don't think they ever fully recovered from the loss of a Marco Bustos when he went to Europe, and bringing in some more creativity. I could see them taking punts on guys like Sagaste or a Luke Norman, of course, if he's available, or who knows, maybe they end up getting both.
Absolutely. Cavalry FC is next. They were the regular season champions. They fell short once again in the playoffs. They need to get over that hump. So Ben, which area do you think this squad needs to improve in?
If Cavalry were smart, they're running to go get in Dumoulin from Mount Royal Cougars. He was a standout goalkeeper in his first year, had 10 clean sheets, was, I believe, the first rookie goalkeeper to keep 10 clean sheets, and there was every aspect of him that was outstanding for a Mount Royal team that went on to win their first Canada West title. Didn't quite get the job done at Nationals, but they were outstanding all season long, and Dumoulin was a big part of that. It's rare you see a goalkeeper look so calm, so poised, and so legitimately pro-ready in his first year. And I think that that's the smartest pick. You're not necessarily thinking of him as a starter, but the ability to bring him in, he's still young, and then send him back to school and retain his rights would be a genius pick for MRU. And honestly, it's somebody that could work their way into the Canamenti picture down the road, given just how well he showed making the jump to U Sports in his first year.
High praise right there. And I mean, they got one of the best keepers in the league and Marco Carducci. So Alex, do you like the fact that they could go for this talented keeper, and knowing down the line, if Marco ends up moving on, they have someone who can step right in?
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? You get mentorship from a goalie who's played for the men's national team as well, right? No better place to learn and take advantage of that potential that Ben just mentioned. And I think it could make sense because Cavalry's kind of had a bit of a rotating wheel at that backup goalkeeper position. Of course, if he ends up going back to U Sports, they'll have to figure something out maybe for the second half of the season. But as we've also seen, Carducci eats minutes. So bringing in a younger face that can develop and learn and have a succession plan, I like that. Because, you look at this Cavalry team, they're pretty deep across the board. They won the league title in pretty dominant fashion. It looks like they should retain a lot of these players. So taking a look at potentially a Carducci successor could make a lot of sense. If not, maybe based on their team, I could see them maybe just looking at another piece of the attack, and maybe that could also be a second pick, for example.
And finally, we have Forge FC, the defending champions. Doesn't really matter how they do in the regular season, because when it comes to playoff time, we know that they're going to find their form. So Ben, if they want to have a bit of a better regular season, where's an area you think that they could strengthen?
Yeah, Forge is a peculiar one when it comes to the U Sports draft. They haven't necessarily utilized it as other clubs have. And that's nothing against them. They've managed to find success in other ways. Most successful club in CPL history, at least when it comes to titles in the playoffs. It's tough to call because I don't think whoever they pick makes the roster in the end. It just hasn't happened in the past. I would not be surprised to see them go for a bit of familiarity and select Dino Bontis out of Western and get another look at him. I think goalkeeper position is something that Forge could look at and try to solidify a little bit behind Tristan Henry. I do think he probably sticks around and is still the starter there. And Dino Bontis had the highest save percentage in the OUA and was one of the top goalkeepers in the OUA as well. And he was a standout with Western. Familiar name, son of former Canada Soccer president Nick Bontis, but he was also on a development contract with Forge a little while back. And so I could see him back in that picture just in terms of familiarity.
Alex, similar to Fillion, I feel like this is a pick that you would like. Tristan Henry, bit of a polarizing figure because he can make a save out of absolutely nowhere, but can let in the odd weak one. Do you think this is an area that Forge down the line could look to strengthen?
I don't see it just this draft, just because I also do think Christopher Kalongo did show some things in the rare minutes he was able to play, because Henry had an injury, and I think there might have been a suspension as well. It's just rest. So I think there's some potential there in Kalongo. So I think, if anything, I could see them go center back, because they had some real issues over the last 2 years with depth. And it's not their fault. Like, Daniel Crutzen suffered a major injury when he was still with the club. Last year there's a reason why Achignoti Johnson's become such a prominent figure at center back. Matusla dealt with injuries. I think if they maybe regretted a bit not signing a guy like Milos Djurdjic after drafting him when they saw the center back crisis that they have. So I could see them maybe going center back, because that attack's loaded. We know that midfield is phenomenal. In goal, I could see them maybe wanting to shore that up, but no, I think center back will be their main priority.
All right, Ben. So to end off this episode, I have 2 quick questions for you. What are some other names out there that maybe weren't mentioned that you think that, maybe you want to focus a little bit light on? And which player do you think will be the hidden gem of this draft?
It's tough to call a hidden gem of the draft, because really so many players can find their form once they get to U Sports. And I also think it depends where you're picked, because as Alex mentioned earlier, I thought Milo Djurdjic would be a starting center back at CPL at this point, but he was picked by Forge and didn't really get the opportunity there at center back. But if he was picked by York United, maybe he's one of the better center backs in the league at this point. Other players to look at: Alex Irwin out of Ontario Tech, a real strong center back and somebody that Forge could go for in their first or second round selection. Anthony Giancino out of Carleton, another name that could find his way into selection. Gianfranco Facchinieri, of course, he was in the Atletico Ottawa picture for a little while. He went to the University of Windsor and is back among the eligible draftees. Sviatek Artemenko has been a standout in League One. Had a little bit of a down year with Thompson Rivers, who didn't quite live up to defending their national title expectations. Daniel Zadrovic out of UNBC is also a shout at goalkeeper. There's a few other former CPLers or people who have had CPL experience. Jose Cunha could make his way into the picture. Nasib Baines has had time with the TSS Rovers and of course showed well in League One, and he was with the University of Toronto. So you can kind of find a way to wrap your mind around a lot of different players when it comes to this draft. And with 204 available, there's some that probably shouldn't be on that list, but credit to them for registering for the CPL draft and putting their name in the hat. But there's certainly a lot that could see themselves selected, and I wouldn't be even surprised to see some brought into CPL training camps without getting selected in the CPL draft.
Absolutely. There's going to be a ton of talent on display for this draft. So Ben, thank you so much for coming on this episode and helping us out. And if you guys want to check out the U Sports draft, be sure to tune into the One Soccer YouTube channel on December 14th to watch the full thing. And if you could, on your way out, be sure to drop a like, drop a sub, and we'll see you guys soon. Cheers, friends.